if you, like me, are interested in things like the labor movement, and because it's summertime, you want a really good book to read, well, there's a great one that is now out. It is called Fight Like Hell, The Untold History of American Labor. It was written by independent labor journalist Kim Kelly, and Kim joins us now. Kim, first of all, congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much. I can't believe it's out there in the world. It's in bookstores, it's in libraries. They let me get away with it.
So you tell sort of the great successes of the fight for workers' rights and organized labor, and how would you list them, or what are some of your favorites that came out of this book?
Oh boy, there's a lot of wins, there's a lot of losses, such as the story of the labor movement. But some of my favorite strikes and struggles to write about were the ones that were firsts. Like, for example, in 1824, young women in Pawtucket, Rhode Island led the nation's first factory strike. And that totally kind of flies in the face of these mainstream ideas of who workers are, who unions are. Young women were out there on the picket lines hundreds of years in the past, and they're still out here now. I loved writing about the Great Sugar Strike of 1946 in Hawaii, which saw a big multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition of workers take on sugar plantation bosses and win. Just showing the strength of multiracial solidarity and organizing across linguistic and ethnic lines. There's really a million of them, and I don't want to go on and on, so I'll stop for now.
Well, we don't want to give away the book, but it seems like there are also some lessons here about people putting aside whatever sort of different ethnicity, nationality, language, culture, and essentially realizing that they have common ground in terms of what they're looking for in terms of workers' rights.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. There's more of us than there are of them, and we're always stronger together. Solidarity is always our greatest weapon, whether they're sugarcane plantation workers in the 40s in Hawaii, or Amazon workers in Staten Island right now, or the workers leading the Starbucks union drive across the country. It's always been the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, the most disenfranchised workers who've had to fight the hardest, and who have fought the hardest to claw and scrape every little inch of progress we've ever had in this country.
You mentioned Amazon and Starbucks and the effort for union workers there. How is that battle similar from the classic ones in history, and how is it different?
So the thing about the Amazon labor union that I think is so cool and so fascinating is the fact that they're doing it independently. They threw out the playbook, the established idea of what you should do, how you should form a union, and they did it themselves, and it worked. And there are so many precedents for that approach throughout history, specifically led by workers who have been kind of left out or disenfranchised or discriminated against. Like the work that Derek Palmer and Christian Smalls and Angelica, all of those workers who are part of the organizing committee in Staten Island, they're building on work of previous organizers like Dorothy Lee Bolden in Atlanta in the 60s, who founded the National Domestic Workers Union of America, which was like an entirely Black women-led domestic workers union. It wasn't recognized by the formal labor union structure. It was an organization run by and for the workers. And they built up a membership of about 10,000 people at its height. They helped professionalize domestic work. They got higher wages. They won respect. And you can see just that sort of independent, okay, if no one else wants to help us, we'll do it ourselves spirit happening throughout history and is manifesting right now too.
Over the last 30 years or so, union membership has dropped, and there did seem to be sort of less interest, I suppose, in unions, but there does seem to be a resurgence now. How do you explain it?
I mean, there are a lot of factors that are kind of working against the working class in general, and especially the past couple of years, whether we're talking about the pandemic and the idea of essential work, that of course workers have always been essential, and the labor of workers who have been invisibilized or disenfranchised has kept the world running. But that became very blatant earlier on in the pandemic. We had a brief window of people acknowledging those workers and paying them a little bit more, showing more respect. And then that went away, and those workers still went to work. I think it sort of reshaped the way that a lot of folks see the value of their lives and their labor. And throughout the past year or so, we've seen these bigger strikes. We've seen these big, ambitious union campaigns. We've seen people pushing back against the powers that be that grind us down, keep their boots on our neck. I don't think you can put lightning back in a bottle the way that we're going right now. Public support for unions is at a record high. A younger, multiracial, multi-gender working class movement of new organizers is sweeping the country. Labor's been on the back foot for pretty much as long as I've been alive. The numbers still aren't great. We still have a long way to go to reclaim some of the density we used to have. But this is a really historic moment, and it's a moment that really fills me with so much optimism because, we needed a win. The working class really needed a break. And right now it feels like we're actually building towards something really powerful.
Whenever I talk to journalists who have a particular area of expertise, I'm always fascinated about what drew them there. What drew you to labor, workers' rights, and those sorts of issues?
Sure. I mean, I spent most of my life in the music business. And really, it's very simple. The way that I shifted my focus, I helped unionize my workplace. Back when I was the heavy metal editor at Vice, we organized in, I think, 2015. And I dove in, got super excited, super involved. I got to know the organizers. I read more about labor law. I helped bargain contracts. I really just soaked in every bit of the experience. And at that point, I was freelancing already. And I decided to start writing a little bit about labor because that's where my head was at. And I just kind of kept doing it. Teen Vogue gave me a column. I started building up more clips. I found that I was going to way more union meetings than I was heavy metal shows. And so by the time I got laid off in 2019, because such is the way of digital media, I decided to just go for it and try and be a labor reporter for real. And about a year later, I signed the contract for this book. So I guess it was a good gamble.
Well, and you're relatively new to the topic. I mean, considering some people, this is something that they know that they've wanted to do since they were kids. What surprised you in putting this book together and in doing the research and the reporting out of all of this? Were there things that surprised you about the labor movement or the history of it?
Yes, my favorite, I love all my chapters, but my favorite chapter to really dig into, I think it's chapter 11, the disabled workers. And that was something that was really personal to me, like as a disabled person in the labor movement. And as someone who I'd always known there must be some overlap there, but I hadn't seen it presented that way. I think that there's this sort of impulse to silo the disability rights movement and the labor movement and act like they're separate entities, but they've always been intertwined. And there's an example in that chapter that really hammered that home for me in a really satisfying way. In 1977, the Section 504 protests, when a group of disabled activists basically occupied a bunch of federal buildings in an effort to make the government actually enact some regulations it was saying it was going to help disabled workers. And in San Francisco specifically, they held it down for 26 days. And they were able to last that long because the Black Panthers fed them. Local church groups came out to support them. When some of those leaders went out to DC to talk to Congress, the Machinist Union showed up with a truck to help transport people, because that was before public transportation was accessible. A lot of those activists used wheelchairs. And I just loved seeing that very material, very obvious intersection between all these movements that are so connected and all those people that are really fighting the same fight on different fronts. And that was really inspiring to me. And I hope people will read that section, just kind of realize how connected we really all are.
And despite those connections, though, despite various groups coming together and providing support so that people can organize, you still run into some people, whether it's in factories or offices or whatnot, who say, I'd like to get better rights. I'd like to be part of this, but I'm just fearful. I'm afraid that I'll be seen as rocking the boat, that I won't be seen as the kind of employee who has a future. What do you say to people like that?
And it's scary, it is scary to rock the boat. It's scary to stick your neck out. And the one thing I can say to folks like that is to remember you're not alone. Talking to your coworkers, organizing in your workplace, making sure that you've got a bunch of people that have your back. That's how you feel powerful. That's how you protect yourself. And honestly, I think a lot of folks in this country don't know that we have the legal right to unionize. We have the legal right to talk about our pay and to organize with our coworkers. Like, we're allowed, even if your boss makes it feel like it's something that you shouldn't be able to get away with. Like, we do have some laws that will protect you. And I think it's really just emphasizing to folks that you're not alone. You don't have to be alone. One person has a really hard time standing up against the capitalist system on their own, but 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, that's how you make some noise. That's how you move some mountains. And it all starts with just talking to the person working next to you.
One of the first stories that stood out to me about sort of labor and workers' rights has to do with when I was a kid, and this is my sort of first exposure to it. Was I think there was a movie or some sort of series about the Triangle Shirt Factory fire, and many women got killed, and there are images on the series of people having to jump off this burning building, and so for me at least, this was sort of a standout seminal event in terms of organizing and trying to make sure that people don't lock the doors on a factory. In terms of sort of the overall arch of history, though, is it really that big, or is it just because of how Hollywood jumped into this?
Well, that one was a really impactful moment. And a part of that was because it happened in the middle of New York City. There were news people taking photos. It was predominantly a young immigrant woman, like Eastern European, Jewish, and Italian women were the workforce, as well as children as young as 14. And just those images of women with their long hair flowing, diving out of a burning building, like that shook people. And that honestly did have an impact because a young woman named Frances Perkins was there that day and she witnessed what was happening. And she had a very long career, but the most impactful moment, the most impactful thing to mention here is that she went on to become the Secretary of Labor. And she was a major architect behind the New Deal and Social Security and all of those worker protections that were part of that package. That's because of her, and that's because she was there and she saw those burning bodies. She heard those workers scream. Like, it's a very visceral piece of history, but we're still feeling the after effects now, positively thanks to that legislation that was laid down, and negatively because workers today are still dealing with some of those issues. Garment workers in Los Angeles are still being trapped in these factories full of dust and poor ventilation and rats. Like, we have come so far, but there is so much further we still need to go.
The book is Fight Like Hell, The Untold History of American Labor. And there it is. Kim Kelly is the author. It is a terrific read. It's gotten great reviews. It's off to an amazing start. And what a wonderful topic. Kim, thanks so much for joining us on the conversation. We appreciate it. And good luck to you as you bring the book to people all across the United States and help tell the story, the history of labor, and also where it's going in the future.
Thank you so much. The future is ours to win.